On the day of my wife's funeral, her boss called me. "You need to see this story." When my wife passed away, her wealthy boss, Alistair Thorne, called me. "Booker, I found something. Come to my office right now," he instructed. Then he added a chilling warning. "Do not tell your son or your daughter-in-law. You could be in grave danger." When I arrived at his estate and saw who was standing at the door, I froze. My blood turned to ice. It was in that moment I realized my wife hadn't simply died. She had been taken from me. But before I reveal what I found in that office, you need to understand how the day of her funeral became the day my own son declared war on me. My name is Booker King, and I am 72 years old. I spent 40 years managing logistics in a warehouse, and before that, I carried a rifle for this country. I know how to read a room, and I know when a storm is coming. But nothing prepared me for the storm that walked into St. Jude's Baptist Church that humid Tuesday morning. I sat in the front pew, staring at the mahogany casket that held Esther, my Esther. We had been married for 45 years. She was a small woman with hands roughened by work but a heart that could hold the world. For 3 decades, she had worked as the head housekeeper and personal assistant to Alistair Thorne, a man with more money than God, but who trusted only one person with his life, my wife. The organ music was soft, a low hum that vibrated in my chest. The church was filling up with neighbors, people from the choir, and even some of Mr. Thorne's staff. Everyone was whispering in respectful low tones. Everyone except the 2 people who should have been sitting right next to me. My son, Terence, and his wife, Tiffany, were late. Not 5 minutes late, but 40 minutes late. The service had already begun when the heavy oak doors at the back of the sanctuary banged open. I didn't turn around, but I didn't have to. I heard the sharp clack of high heels against the stone floor, echoing like gunshots in a library. Heads turned. I could feel the collective intake of breath from the congregation. I kept my eyes fixed on the white lilies atop Esther's casket, her favorite. Then I smelled them before I saw them. A cloud of expensive, cloying perfume that smelled like desperation and money mixed with the stale scent of cigarettes. Terence slid into the pew beside me. He was wearing a bright, cream-colored suit that looked like something a pimp would wear to a nightclub, not a son to his mother's funeral. He didn't touch my shoulder. He didn't squeeze my hand. He didn't even look at the casket. He pulled out his phone. The screen lit up in the dim church, illuminating his face. He was texting. His thumbs moved furiously, and his jaw was tight. I glanced sideways and saw the cold sweat beading on his forehead. It wasn't from grief. It was the cold sweat of a man cornered. Tiffany squeezed in next to him. She was a white woman from a middle-class suburb who pretended she was born in a penthouse. She wore huge black sunglasses inside the church and a dress that was too short and too tight for the occasion. She fanned herself with a funeral program, looking around with open disdain. "This place is a sauna," she whispered, loud enough for the choir to hear. "Didn't they have money for AC?" "Shoo," Terence hissed, but he didn't put his phone away. I gripped the handle of my cane. It was a sturdy piece of hickory wood I had carved myself. My knuckles turned white. I wanted to tell them to leave. I wanted to tell them to show some respect for the woman who had paid for Terence's college, who had paid for their wedding, who had bailed them out more times than I could count. But I said nothing. I am a man of discipline. I would not cause a scene at Esther's homegoing. The service ended, and we moved to the fellowship hall for the repast. The church ladies had prepared the food Esther loved: fried chicken, collard greens, macaroni and cheese, and cornbread. The smell was comforting to everyone else, but it seemed to offend Tiffany. She stood near the wall, holding a paper plate with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. I watched her from my seat in the corner. She leaned in close to Terence, and I have hearing aids that I keep tuned very high. Most people think I'm just an old, deaf man, but I hear everything. "I can't believe we have to eat this grease," Tiffany hissed. "My stomach is turning just looking at it. And look at these people. This whole thing is so cheap. Where did all her money go, Terence? You said she had savings." "She spent it on pills," Terence muttered, his mouth full of food he hadn't bothered to bless. "Well, at least that expense is gone now," Tiffany said, and she let out a small, cruel laugh. That's $500 a month back in our pockets. My heart stopped. Then it started beating again with a slow, heavy rhythm of pure rage. My wife was not even in the ground an hour, and they were celebrating the savings on her heart medication. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, not from age, but from the urge to wrap them around something. The room began to clear out. Neighbors came by to shake my hand, offering condolences. I nodded and thanked them, but my eyes never left my son. He was pacing by the exit, checking his watch every 30 seconds. Finally, when the last guest had left, Terrence walked over to me. He didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't ask if I needed a ride home. He stood over me, blocking the light. "Dad," he said, his voice flat, "where is the key to Mom's safe?" I looked up at him slowly. I saw the bags under his eyes, the twitch in his cheek. This was my boy, the boy I taught to fish. The boy Esther had rocked to sleep. Now he looked at me like I was an ATM that had swallowed his card. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice raspy. "The safe key," Terrence repeated, louder this time. "Tiffany says Mom had a life insurance policy. We need to check the paperwork. We are entitled to 50% as next of kin." Tiffany stepped up beside him, crossing her arms. "We need to start the probate process immediately. Booker, funerals are expensive and we have bills. We know Esther hoarded cash in the house." I stood up. Took me a moment. My knees were stiff. I leaned on my cane and looked them both in the eye.
I'm 6'2".
Even bent with age, I towered over Tiffany. "Your mother is not even cold yet," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "And you are asking for money." "It's not about money. It's about asset management," Terrence snapped. "Don't be difficult, Dad. We know you don't know how to handle finances. You just worked in a warehouse. Mom handled everything. We are just trying to help." "Help?" I scoffed. "You are trying to scavenge. There is no money for you, Terrence. Not today." Terrence stepped closer, invading my personal space. His eyes were wild. "Listen to me, old man. You do not know what is going on. And this house is in trouble. We are in trouble. If we do not find that money by the end of the week, things are going to get very bad." "What kind of bad?" I asked. "The kind where you end up on the street," Terrence spat. "Now give me the damn key, or I will turn this house upside down until I find it myself." He reached for my pocket. I slapped his hand away with a speed that surprised us both. "Get out of my face," I growled. Tiffany gasped. "You are senile," she shrieked. "You are losing your mind. We should have you committed for your own safety." "We will discuss that later, Tiffany," Terrence said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Dad, you have until tonight. If I do not have that key, I am calling the social worker. I will tell them you are unfit to live alone. I will sell this house out from under you." He turned and stormed out. Tiffany shot me one last look of disgust before following him, her heels clicking away like a ticking clock. I stood alone in the fellowship hall. The silence was deafening. My own son. He was desperate. I had seen that look in the eyes of junkies and gamblers before. He was not just greedy, he was afraid. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my breast pocket. I pulled it out. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. The screen was cracked, but I could read the name clearly. Mr. Alistair Thorne. Esther's boss, the billionaire who hadn't left his estate in 5 years. Why was he calling me? I answered. "Booker." His voice was not the smooth, commanding baritone I remembered. It was jagged, breathless. "Mr. Thorne," I started. "Listen to me, Booker." He cut me off. "I was going through the safe Esther kept here at my private office. She left something. A ledger and a recording." I frowned. "A recording?" "Booker, you need to come to my estate right now. Do not go home. Do not tell Terrence. Do not tell that woman he married. If they know what I know, you will not survive the night." "What are you talking about, Mr. Thorne?" "They didn't just wait for her to die, Booker," Thorne whispered. "They helped her along." The room spun. I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself. Come to the service entrance, Thorne said. The gate is open. I have someone here you need to see. I hung up the phone. The grief that had been weighing me down evaporated. In its place was a cold, hard resolve that I walked out of the church and climbed into my rusted 1990 Ford pickup truck. It was old and ugly, but the engine was strong, and in the glove box, wrapped in an oily rag, was my old service pistol. I checked the chamber, loaded. I wasn't just a widower anymore. I was a soldier entering enemy territory, and my son was the target. I had told Terrence I was going to see the pastor to settle the final bill for the service. It was a lie, but lies were the only currency my son understood anymore. I grabbed my keys from the hook by the door, but before I could turn the handle, a manicured hand slammed against the wood, blocking my path. It was Tiffany. She was still wearing that black dress that was too tight, and her eyes were hidden behind those ridiculous sunglasses. Even though we were inside a dim hallway, she held out a palm, her fingers wiggling expectantly. "Where do you think you are going, Booker?" she asked, her voice dripping with the fake sweetness that made my skin crawl. "To pay the church," I said, keeping my voice flat. "You are not going anywhere without leaving the credit card," she said, stepping closer. "I need to go buy supplies for the guests who might drop by later. We need wine. We need decent cheese. Not that garbage the church lady served." I looked at her. I really looked at her. I saw the way her eyes darted to my back pocket where my wallet was. She didn't want cheese. She wanted to go to the mall. She wanted a new handbag to match her funeral attire. She wanted to swipe my card until the magnetic strip wore off, just like she had done to Esther for years. I reached into my pocket. Tiffany smiled, a greedy little smirk that showed her teeth. I pulled out my wallet. Her hand twitched. I opened it and pulled out a single $20 bill. It was wrinkled and worn just like me. I let it drop from my fingers. It fluttered through the air and landed on the linoleum floor right between her expensive heels. "Get some crackers," I said. Her mouth fell open. She looked at the money, then at me, her face turning a blotchy red. "Is this a joke?" she shrieked. "Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," I said, stepping forward. She flinched. For a second, the mask slipped and I saw the fear. She scrambled back, stepping aside to let me pass while her eyes stayed glued to the 20 on the floor. She would pick it up. I knew she would. She would pick it up the moment the door closed because greed has no pride. I walked out into the humid afternoon air and climbed into my 1990 Ford pickup. The door creaked a mournful sound as I pulled it shut. The cab smelled of old leather and pipe tobacco. It was my sanctuary. The engine roared to life with a cough and a sputter, but it settled into a steady rhythm. This truck was like me, ugly on the outside, but it never quit. I backed out of the driveway, leaving my son and his wife to fight over the scraps in my house. As I drove down the street, the houses began to blur. I wasn't just driving to the other side of town. I was driving back in time. I thought about Esther. For 30 years, she had left our house at dawn and returned after dark. She took the bus to the north side, to the gated estates where the driveways were longer than our entire block. She scrubbed floors. She polished silver. She organized lives that were not her own. To the world, she was just a housekeeper, a servant, invisible. But Esther saw everything. She knew where the skeletons were buried because she was the one dusting the closets. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles popping. My son Terrence thought I was just a tired old man who moved boxes in a warehouse. He forgot what I did before the warehouse. He forgot that Uncle Sam sent me to a jungle halfway across the world when I was just 18. You learn things in war. You learn that the quietest moments are the most dangerous. You learn to watch the grass for movement that shouldn't be there. You learn that when the enemy smiles, he is usually holding a knife behind his back. I had been watching Terrence and Tiffany for months. I noticed the new watch Terrence wore that cost more than my truck. I noticed the way Tiffany stopped leaving receipts on the counter. I noticed the way Esther had grown quiet in the weeks before she died, her eyes darting to the phone every time it rang. I had been trained to spot an ambush, but I never thought the enemy would be sleeping in the guest bedroom. I merged onto the highway, the old Ford vibrating under my hands. I checked my mirrors constantly. Old habits die hard. No one was following me. Terrence was too busy trying to find the safe key to notice I was gone. I took the exit for Highland Park. The air changed here. It smelled of freshly cut grass and old money. The fences grew higher. The gates became more elaborate. I pulled up to the massive iron gates of the Thorne estate. A security camera buzzed and turned toward me. I rolled down the window. "Booker King," I said. The gate clicked and swung open silently. I drove up the winding paved driveway lined with oak trees that were older than the country itself. My rusted truck looked like a stain on a white sheet against the pristine landscaping. I parked next to a silver Rolls-Royce. The contrast would have made a lesser man feel small. It just made me feel focused. I got out and adjusted my suit jacket. It was a cheap suit bought off the rack 10 years ago, but I wore it with the posture of a man who answers to no one. The front door opened before I could knock. Alistair Thorne stood there. He was 80 years old, confined to a wheelchair, his body withered by time and illness, but his eyes were as sharp as broken glass. He wore a velvet smoking jacket and a silk scarf. He didn't look at me like the help. He didn't look at me like a charity case. He looked at me like a man who was about to go into battle and was glad to see another soldier. "Booker," he said, his voice raspy but firm. "Mr. Thorne." I nodded. He extended a hand. It was thin and trembling, but his grip was surprisingly strong. We didn't shake hands like businessmen. We clasped hands like brothers. "I am sorry about Esther," he said. "She was the finest woman I ever knew. Better than me, better than all of us." "Thank you, sir," I said, my throat tight. "Come inside," Thorne said, spinning his wheelchair around. "We do not have much time. Your son will figure out you are gone soon." I followed him into the foyer. The floors were marble. The ceilings soared 20 feet high. It was a palace, but it felt cold. Empty. Esther had been the warmth in this house. Without her, it was just a museum. We went past the grand staircase, past the formal dining room where a long table sat empty, and down a hallway lined with portraits of dead ancestors who looked down at me with disapproval. I stared right back at them. I had buried more men than they had ever met. Thorne led me to his private study at the back of the house. It was a room I had never been in. The walls were lined with leather-bound books. The air smelled of cedar and brandy. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn, blocking out the afternoon sun, casting the room in shadow. But we were not alone. Standing by the fireplace was a man I did not recognize. He was tall, wearing a trench coat that looked like it had seen better days. He had a scar running down his cheek and eyes that looked like they had seen the bottom of a bottle and the bottom of humanity. "Booker, this is Mr. Vance," Thorne said. "He is a private investigator. Esther hired him 2 months ago." My heart skipped a beat. Esther hired a PI. "Why?" Vance nodded at me. He didn't smile. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and respect. "Please sit down," Thorne said, gesturing to a heavy leather chair in front of his massive oak desk. He sat. The leather creaked. I felt like I was sitting in the electric chair, waiting for the switch to be thrown. Thorne wheeled himself behind the desk. He placed his hands on a stack of items sitting in the center of the green blotter. There was a small black leather journal. I recognized it immediately. It was Esther's prayer journal. She carried it everywhere. And next to it was a thick envelope filled with photographs. "I found this in the safe Esther kept here," Thorne said softly. "She had her own combination. I never asked what was in it. I trusted her completely. But after she passed, I knew I had to look. I had to make sure her affairs were in order." He pushed the journal toward me. "Open it, Booker. Read the last entry." My hands shook as I reached for the book. The leather was warm, as if she had just been holding it. I opened it to the bookmark. The handwriting was hers, neat and looping, but the ink was shaky, as if she had been writing in a hurry or in fear. I read the words. "Terrence asked for money again. I told him no." He looked at me with eyes I did not recognize. He looked at me like he hated me. "I found the pills in his jacket pocket today. They look just like my heart medication. But they aren't. I am scared, Booker. I am scared of our son. I stopped reading. The room seemed to tilt. Couldn't breathe. Mr. Vance spoke up, his voice gravelly. Look at the photos, Mr. King. I reached for the envelope and poured the contents onto the desk. Dozens of grainy photos spilled out, taken with a long-range lens, but the subjects were clear. There was Terrence, standing in an alleyway, talking to a man with tattoos on his neck, handing over a thick wad of cash. There was another photo, Terrence and Tiffany sitting in a car. Tiffany was laughing, holding up a bottle of champagne. But the last photo made me freeze. Felt like a physical blow to the chest. It was taken through the kitchen window of my own house. The timestamp said 2 a.m., 3 nights ago. In the photo, Terrence was standing at the kitchen counter. He was holding 2 orange prescription bottles. One was Esther's heart medication. The other was unlabeled. He was pouring the pills from one bottle into the other. He was smiling. I stared at the image. My son, my flesh and blood, the boy I had carried on my shoulders, the boy I had taught to tie his shoes. He was switching the pills. He killed her, I whispered. The words felt like gravel in my mouth. He killed his own mother. Thorne leaned forward, his face grim. He didn't just kill her, Booker. He executed her. And now he is coming for you. Why? I asked, looking up, my eyes burning but dry. Why would he do this? Thorne pointed to the journal again. Turn the page, Booker. Look at what she was hiding from you. Look at what she was hiding from everyone. I turned the page, and there, pasted into the book, was a bank statement. The balance was not a few thousand. It was not even $100,000. It was $3 million. My Esther, the housekeeper, the woman who clipped coupons and darned my socks. She was a millionaire, and Terrence knew. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. He didn't kill her because he hated her. He killed her because he was greedy. He killed her for a payday. I stood up. The chair fell backward with a crash. I am going to kill him, I roared. I reached for my back waistband where the cold steel of my pistol pressed against my spine. I am going to go back there and I am going to put a bullet in his head. No! Thorne shouted, his voice cracking like a whip. I stopped, panting, my hand on the gun. If you kill him now, you go to prison, and he wins, Vance said, stepping forward, his hands raised. You will rot in a cell, and Tiffany will spend that money on vacations and jewelry. Is that what Esther would want? I looked at the photo of my son, the monster. Then what do? I asked, my voice breaking. We trap him, Thorne said. His eyes were cold and hard. We make him confess. We make him destroy himself. But to do that, you have to go back there. Go back? I asked. To that house with him? Yes, Thorne said. You have to go back. You have to play the grieving, confused old man. You have to make him think he has won. You have to make him think you are weak. Can you do that, Booker? Can you look the man who murdered your wife in the eye and pretend you don't know? I looked at the journal. I looked at the photos. I thought about Esther. I thought about the fear she must have felt in those final days. I took a deep breath. I straightened my jacket. I picked up my cane. I was a soldier once. I know how to follow orders. And I know how to wait for the kill shot. I will do it, I said. Thorne nodded. Good. Now listen carefully. Here is what we are going to do. As he laid out the plan, I felt the old soldier inside me waking up. My son thought he was a predator. He thought I was prey. He was about to find out that he had walked into the den of a lion. The desecration. I drove back to my house in my old Ford pickup, and the steering wheel felt like it was made of ice under my grip. I had to bury the soldier who wanted to strangle his enemy and resurrect the father who was lost in grief. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Every mile marker felt like a step closer to hell. I pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine. I sat there for a moment, gathering the strength to walk into the house that was no longer a home. I stepped onto the porch, and the front door was already ajar. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear, but from the violation of it. This was Esther's sanctuary. Now the door hung open like a broken jaw. I stepped into the foyer, and the sound hit me first. It was a tearing sound, wet and sharp, like flesh being ripped from bone. I walked into the living room and stopped. The air was thick with dust and feathers. Tiffany was on her knees in the center of the room. In her hand, she held a yellow box cutter. She was attacking Esther's favorite floral sofa, the one she had saved for 3 years to buy. Tiffany was slashing the cushions open one by one, plunging her hands into the stuffing and ripping it out in great white handfuls. She looked like a wild animal. Her hair was wild. Her dress was stained with dust, and she was muttering to herself, "Where is it? Where is the cash?" She didn't even see me. The floor was littered with papers, books pulled from shelves, and shattered knickknacks. Then I heard another sound coming from down the hall. A high-pitched mechanical whine, a drill. My stomach dropped. The master bedroom, our bedroom. I walked down the hallway, my cane tapping softly on the hardwood. Our wedding photo was lying on the floor, the glass cracked over Esther's smiling face. I stepped over it, careful not to crush her image. I pushed open the bedroom door. The room was unrecognizable. Esther's clothes were trampled underfoot. And there in the corner was Terrence. He was sweating through his cream-colored suit, holding a heavy-duty power drill, pressing it with all his weight against the small wall safe Esther had hidden behind the painting of the Last Supper. The painting was thrown in the corner. Terrence was grunting, his face twisted in a mask of pure greed. Smoke rose from the friction, filling the room with the smell of burning steel. He wasn't looking for documents. He was looking for the payout he believed he was owed. I needed to stop the desecration before I lost control and ruined the plan. I let my body go slack. I allowed my knees to buckle slightly. I loosened my grip on my hickory cane and let it fall. It hit the floor with a loud clatter that cut through the noise of the drill like a gunshot. Terrence jumped. The drill slipped, screeching across the metal door of the safe and gouging the wall. He spun around, wild-eyed. His chest was heaving. His eyes were red-rimmed and frantic. He looked at me, and for a second he didn't see his father. He saw an intruder. He saw an obstacle. Then recognition dawned, but it brought no shame, only anger. He dropped the drill onto the pile of Esther's clothes. He pointed a shaking finger at the open safe. "It is empty," he screamed. His voice cracked with hysteria. "Empty. There is nothing in here but dust. Where is it? Where is the money? Where are the bonds?" I stared at him, letting my mouth hang open slightly, feigning the confusion of a man whose world had stopped making sense. I leaned against the door frame, clutching my chest as if my heart were failing. I didn't speak. I just looked at the empty safe, then back at him, letting the silence stretch, letting his panic grow. He kicked the bed frame hard. "Don't look at me like that, old man," he shouted. "You knew, didn't you? You knew she moved it. You and her were always whispering, always hiding things from me." Terrence marched across the room, closing the distance between us in 3 long strides. He grabbed the front of my jacket, bunching the cheap fabric in his fist, and shoved me back against the door frame. His face was inches from mine. I could smell the stale alcohol on his breath mixed with the acrid scent of his fear. He reached down and picked up the power drill again. He revved it once, the sound sharp and menacing right next to my ear. He held the spinning bit inches from my face. The metal blurred, a gray spiral of potential violence. "Tell me," he hissed, his spit landing on my cheek. "Tell me where the old hag hid the money, or I swear to God, I will drill the answer out of your skull. Speak, old man. Where is the inheritance?" The drill bit spun inches from my nose, a blur of gray steel that smelled of ozone and violence. Terrence was breathing hard, his eyes wide with a madness that had consumed him whole. I felt the heat radiating from the motor against my cheek. My heart was already hammering against my ribs, but I knew I had to weaponize that fear. Thorne's words echoed in my mind. "Buy time, Booker. Play the victim. Don't let him kill you before we have the proof." I looked into my son's eyes, and I saw no recognition there, only the cold stare of a stranger who wanted something I possessed. I knew if I stayed standing, he would use that drill. He was past the point of reason. I let my eyelids flutter. I allowed my jaw to go slack. I reached up with a trembling hand and clutched at the fabric of my shirt right over my heart. I forced the air out of my lungs in a ragged, wheezing gasp that sounded like a dying engine. My knees buckled for real this time as I let gravity take me. I slid down the doorframe until I hit the floor with a heavy thud. I curled into myself, groaning low in my throat, my hand clawing at the carpet. It wasn't entirely acting. The stress and the physical threat had spiked my blood pressure. I could feel the room spinning. Terrence stepped back, the drill still whirring, his expression shifting from aggression to sudden panic. He wasn't worried about losing his father. He was worried about losing the combination to the safe. Tiffany appeared in the doorway, her hair wild and her black funeral dress covered in white feathers from the decimated sofa. She took one look at me writhing on the floor and dropped the box cutter she had been using. Her face went pale, not with concern, but with calculation. "Don't let him die," she screeched, rushing forward and grabbing Terrence's arm. "If he dies now, we lose everything, Terrence. He is the only one who knows where the assets are. If he croaks, that money disappears into the system. Think, you idiot." Terrence looked down at me, cursed loudly, and tossed the drill onto the bed. He knelt beside me, grabbing my collar with both hands and shaking me violently. "Wake up, old man. You don't get to die yet. Not until you tell me where the money is." He slapped me hard across the face. The sting was sharp, but I kept my eyes half closed, focusing on my breathing, making it shallow and irregular. I let my head loll to the side. I needed to give them a number big enough to blind them, a number big enough to make them keep me alive. I licked my dry lips and whispered, "The trust." Terrence froze. He leaned in closer, his ear almost touching my mouth. "What trust? Say it again." I wheezed, forcing the words out between gasps. "The trust fund. Esther set it up. $2 million. The lawyer. He comes next week." I let my head fall back against the floorboards. I watched through slit eyes as Terrence looked up at Tiffany. A slow, greedy smile spread across his face, erasing the panic. $2 million, he whispered, testing the weight of the words. The transformation was complete. The murderer vanished, replaced by the opportunist. He didn't see a dying father anymore. He saw a winning lottery ticket that needed to be kept safe until cashing day. He grabbed me under the arms and hauled me up. He threw me onto the mattress. He stood over me, panting, his eyes gleaming with a feverish light. "We have to keep him alive," Tiffany said, pacing the room. "Just until next week, just until the lawyer comes and we can get him to sign it over. We need to make sure he doesn't talk to anyone else." Terrence nodded. He reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my smartphone. "You won't be needing this," he said. "You need rest, Dad. Lots of rest." He slipped the phone into his own pocket, cutting off my lifeline to the outside world. He backed out of the room, his eyes never leaving mine, looking like a zookeeper locking a dangerous animal in its cage. Tiffany followed. The door slammed shut, and then came the sound that sealed my fate. The metallic slide of the deadbolt, the sharp click of the lock engaging. I was a prisoner. The trap is set. I lay still on the bed, listening to their footsteps retreating down the hall, listening to them whispering about millions that didn't exist, planning a future they would never see. 2 days passed in that stifling room. Twice a day, Tiffany would slide a plastic plate across the floor with her foot like she was feeding a stray mongrel, sneering, "Eat up, old man. We're cutting costs until the trust fund clears." I forced myself to eat the moldy sandwich and drink the lukewarm water. Soldiers don't starve out of pride. Night felt like a heavy blanket. I pressed my ear against the wood of the door. The house was old, and the ventilation ducts carried sound. I heard heavy footsteps pacing in the living room. Then, the ring of a cell phone shattered the silence. Terrence answered. "Please listen to me, Marco." I heard him plead. "I have the money coming. It's a trust fund. My mother left it. No, do not send anyone to the house. I swear on my life I will have it." There was a pause. Then Terrence spoke again, his voice cracking with tears. $500,000 is a lot of cash to move in 2 days. I need more time. Just give me a week. Please, Marco, I lost it on the spread, but I can make it back. Do not touch my legs. I heard a sob. My son was not just a murderer. He was a desperate fool. He had gambled away $500,000. He was deep in the hole with the kind of men who didn't send late notices. The deadline was 3 days. He was going to squeeze me until I signed because he had a gun to his head. I waited until I heard Terence pass out on the couch. I crawled toward the bed. Esther had been a brilliant woman. Years ago, she hired a carpenter to install a false bottom in the floorboard under her side of the bed. I pushed the heavy mattress aside and pried up the loose board with a metal spoon handle I had hidden from my dinner tray. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay my salvation. A Nokia brick phone, fully charged, and the cold, heavy weight of a .38 snub-nose revolver. I checked the cylinder 5 rounds, enough to end this. But Thorne was right. I needed justice. I turned on the phone. The screen glowed green. I typed a message to the number Thorne had given me. The wolf is at the door. Debt is 500 large. Deadline 3 days. Need extraction. The phone buzzed against my palm. A single text message. Lawyer Solomon Gold arrives at 900 hours tomorrow. He has the paperwork. Get ready to play your part. Do not break character. We are coming for you. I hid the phone and the gun. Tomorrow the curtain would rise. I closed my eyes and practiced my tremors. Tomorrow I would be the frail old man they wanted to see. But inside I was already pulling the trigger. The lawyer arrives. The sun came up like a judgment I wasn't ready to face. But the click of the deadbolt told me showtime had started. The door swung open, and for the first time in 2 days, I wasn't greeted with a sneer. Tiffany stood there, holding a steaming mug of coffee, her face plastered with a smile that looked like it hurt. "Good morning, Dad," she chirped. "We have a guest. You need to look presentable." She handed me the mug. Terence appeared behind her, wearing a fresh suit and a tie that was too tight. He grabbed my arm, not to hurt me this time, but to steady me. "Easy there, old-timer," he said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Let's get you to the living room. Mr. Gold is here." They walked me down the hallway like I was a piece of fragile china they were afraid to drop. I leaned heavily on my cane, shuffling my feet, playing the part of the confused invalid perfectly. In the living room sat a man who looked like he could foreclose on your house just by looking at it. Solomon Gold was not a large man, but he took up all the space in the room. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than my first house, and his eyes were black marbles behind rimless glasses. He didn't stand when I entered. He just watched me like a hawk spotting a field mouse. "Mr. King," he said, his voice smooth as oiled, "I am Solomon Gold. I represent your late wife's estate. Please sit." Terence guided me to the armchair, the one Tiffany hadn't slashed to ribbons yet. He sat next to me, perched on the edge of the cushion, his knee bouncing with nervous energy. Tiffany sat on the arm of his chair, playing the devoted daughter-in-law. We were a picture-perfect family, if you ignored the smell of desperation and the hidden gun under my mattress. Gold opened a leather briefcase and pulled out a single thick document bound in blue paper. He adjusted his glasses and looked at Terence, then at me. "Mrs. King was a very prudent woman," he began. "She set up a living trust 3 years ago. The assets within that trust, including the investment portfolio and the offshore accounts, total approximately $3 million. Terence made a noise in his throat like a dying engine. His eyes bulged. He looked at Tiffany, and I saw the greed wash over them, momentarily erasing their fear. Gold continued, ignoring my son's reaction. "According to the terms of the trust, upon her death, the entirety of the estate transfers to her husband, Booker King." Terence nodded eagerly, reaching out to pat my shoulder. "That's right," he said, his palms sweating against my jacket. "Dad is the beneficiary. We are just here to help him manage it." Gold raised a hand, stopping him. "There is a condition, Mr. King." Esther was very specific. She included a competency clause. Because of the significant value of the assets, The beneficiary must be certified as being of sound mind and body by a medical professional before he can access a single cent or sign any checks. Terrence froze. His hand stopped patting my shoulder. Gold leaned forward, his voice dropping an octave. If the beneficiary is found to be incompetent, senile, or unable to make rational decisions, the trust automatically locks. The assets are frozen and placed into a high-yield holding account for a period of 10 years to ensure their protection. During that time, no one, not even family members or legal guardians, can access the principal amount. 10 years. The words hung in the air like smoke. I watched the blood drain from Terrence's face. He didn't have 10 years. He didn't have 10 days. He had Marco and the guys with baseball bats waiting for him. Tiffany, still sticking to their original script, let out a dramatic sigh. "Oh, Mr. Gold, that is such a shame," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "We have been so worried about Booker lately. He has been forgetting things. He leaves the stove on. He talks to people who aren't there. I don't think he can pass a competency test. It might be best for everyone if we just accept that the trust needs to be frozen. Or maybe you can transfer guardianship to Terrence." Gold started to close the folder. "I see," he said, reaching for the clasp. "If that is the case, I will have to file the paperwork to lock the assets immediately. It is for his own protection, of course. We can revisit the status of the trust in a decade." The lock clicked shut. The sound was like a gunshot to Terrence. "No!" he shouted, jumping up and knocking Tiffany sideways. "Shut up, Tiffany. You don't know what you are talking about." He turned to Gold, his hands waving frantically. "She is exaggerating. Dad is fine. He is just grieving. Look at him. He is sharp as a tack. He remembers everything. Don't you, Dad?" He grabbed my shoulder again, digging his fingers in hard. "Tell him, Dad. Tell him you are fine. Tell him you are not crazy." I looked at my son. He was begging me to be sane so he could rob me. It was pathetic. I looked at Gold and blinked slowly. "I feel fine," I said, my voice shaky but clear. "I just miss my Esther." Gold looked at me, then at Terrence, then back at the file. He tapped his fingers on the leather case, considering. "Very well," he said. "If you insist he is competent, we can proceed. But I need proof. I cannot release $3 million on your word alone." He pulled a card from his pocket. "I have scheduled a comprehensive medical evaluation for tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. It is with an independent physician. If Mr. King passes, he gets the checkbook. If he fails, the vault locks for 10 years. Do we have an understanding?" Terrence let out a breath that sounded like a sob. "Yes," he said, wiping his forehead. "Yes, we understand. Dad will be there. He will pass. I promise." Gold stood up and buttoned his jacket. "Good day, gentlemen." He walked out the door, leaving a silence behind him that was heavy with threat. Terrence turned to me. The panic was gone, replaced by a cold, dark resolve. He smiled, and it was the smile of a wolf looking at a lamb. "You are going to be the healthiest man in the world tomorrow, Dad," he whispered. "I am going to make sure of it." The poisoned pot roast. Night fell over the house like a shroud, and the air inside grew thick with the smell of roasting meat and impending violence. For the first time in the 10 years she had lived under my roof, Tiffany was cooking. Terrence sat at the kitchen table, drumming his fingers. His leg bounced up and down, a nervous tic he'd developed since the phone call with Marco. He watched me like a hawk. I sat in my usual spot, hands folded over my cane, trying to look frail. Tiffany hummed as she moved around the stove, wearing an apron over her designer clothes. "Dinner is almost ready, Dad," she chirped, turning to flash me a smile that showed too many teeth. "We made your favorite pot roast with extra gravy. We need you strong for tomorrow. You have to pass that test with flying colors so we can get this trust sorted out and take care of you properly." I watched her back in the reflection of the dark window. She thought I was staring at my own reflection, lost in the dementia she claimed I had, but I was watching her hands. She reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small white paper packet. She glanced over her shoulder at me. I let my jaw hang slack and stared blankly at the window. Satisfied, she turned back to the stove. In the reflection, I saw her tear the packet open. She tipped it over the bowl of soup she had set aside for me. A fine white powder cascaded into the dark broth, dissolving instantly. She stirred it vigorously, mixing the death into the dinner. She picked up the bowl and turned around, her face composed into a mask of maternal care. "Here we go, Dad," she said, setting the steaming bowl in front of me. "Eat up while it is hot. The gravy will do you good." I looked down at the brown liquid. It smelled savory, salty, and lethal. Terrence was watching me intently, his eyes locked on the spoon in my hand. "Eat, Dad," he urged, his voice tight. "You need the nutrition." I lifted the spoon. My hand trembled. I let the tremor grow worse, shaking the utensil until it rattled against the bowl. I lifted a spoonful toward my mouth. Terrence leaned forward, holding his breath. Tiffany waited. I brought the spoon to my lips, then let a violent spasm take over my arm. I jerked my hand sideways. The spoon hit the edge of the bowl hard. "Oops," I whispered. I swept my arm across the table in a clumsy arc, knocking the bowl completely over. It flew off the edge of the table and shattered on the linoleum floor. The soup splashed everywhere, coating the cabinets, the chair legs, and my shoes in a hot, sticky mess. "Oh no!" I cried, my voice cracking. "I am so clumsy. I am so sorry," Tiffany shrieked, jumping back. "You stupid old man," she yelled, forgetting her role. "Look what you did." Terrence stood up, his face red. "It is okay," he said through gritted teeth. "It was an accident, Tiffany. Clean it up. We will get him another bowl." But before Tiffany could move, a low, growling sound came from under the table. It was Precious, Tiffany's prize-winning English bulldog. The dog waddled out from the living room, attracted by the smell of the meat. "Precious, no!" Tiffany shouted. The dog lunged for the puddle of gravy, lapping it up with greedy, enthusiastic noises. She licked the floor tiles clean, ingesting the soup, the powder, the secret ingredient, all in a matter of seconds. "Get away from there!" Tiffany screamed, kicking at the dog. It was too late. For a moment, nothing happened. Precious looked up, licking her chops, wagging her tail. Then she sneezed. Started as a sneeze, then a cough, then a high-pitched wheeze. The dog's legs stiffened. She fell onto her side, kicking the air as if she were running in a dream. Foam bubbled from her jowls. Her eyes rolled back into her head, showing the whites. Tiffany dropped to her knees, screaming the dog's name. She tried to hold the animal, but Precious was thrashing violently. 1 minute passed. The thrashing slowed. 2 minutes. The wheezing turned into a gurgle. 3 minutes. The dog went rigid one last time, arching her back, and then she went limp. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Precious lay dead on the kitchen floor. I looked at the dead animal. Then I looked up at my son. "What happened to the dog, Terrence?" I asked, my voice trembling with a fear that I didn't have to fake. "Why did she die?" Terrence stared at the dog, his face draining of color until he looked like a corpse himself. He looked at the empty packet peeking out of Tiffany's apron pocket, then back at the dead animal. "She had a cold," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "She was sick. It was just a seizure, Dad. Just a cold." He lied. I knew he lied. And looking into his terrified eyes, I knew he knew that I knew. That soup wasn't meant to make me compliant. It was meant to stop my heart. The wrong turn. The sun rose gray and sickly over the city. I had survived the night by pushing a heavy dresser in front of my bedroom door, sleeping with one eye open, my hand gripping the cold steel of my revolver. Terrence banged on my door at 7 o'clock sharp. "Get dressed, Dad," he shouted through the wood. "We have that appointment." I moved the dresser slowly, making enough noise to sound like an old man struggling. When I opened the door, he looked worse than I did. He smelled of mints trying to cover the scent of whiskey. He ushered me out to his car, a leased luxury sedan that was 2 months behind on payments. I sat in the passenger seat, clutching my cane, watching the familiar streets of my neighborhood fade away. I expected us to turn toward the city center, toward the hospital district where the real doctors practiced. But Terrence turned left toward the industrial park, toward the part of town where the streetlights were broken and the storefronts were boarded up with plywood. "Where are we going, son?" I asked, my voice trembling just the right amount. "The hospital is the other way. We are going to a specialist, Dad," Terrence said, his eyes fixed on the road, gripping the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. "A private practitioner. He's the best. He'll get you that certificate in no time." I looked out the window at the graffiti-stained walls and the piles of trash on the curb. A specialist. Sure. We pulled up to a brick building that looked like it had been condemned 10 years ago. There was no sign, just a metal door with peeling green paint. Terrence hurried me out of the car, looking over his shoulder as if he expected the devil himself to be following us. We walked inside. The waiting room smelled of mildew and stale cigarette smoke. There were no magazines, no receptionist, just a flickering fluorescent light that buzzed like a dying fly. A door opened and a man stepped out. He was wearing a white coat, but it was stained yellow at the cuffs. He was short, balding, and sweating profusely despite the chill in the room. I recognized him, not as a doctor, but from the photos Vance had shown me. This was Doc Miller, a disgraced veterinarian who had lost his license for selling ketamine to local dealers. He was Terrence's poker buddy. "Ah, Mr. King," Miller said, wiping his damp hands on his coat. "Please come in. We have everything ready." I shuffled into the examination room. It was filthy. "Sit down," Miller said, gesturing to the table. Terrence stood by the door, blocking the exit. I sat, the paper crinkling loudly under my weight. Miller moved to a metal tray. I saw a syringe. It was already filled with a clear liquid. It was a large dose, too large for a vitamin B shot, too large for anything meant to heal. I watched him tap the barrel, flicking the air bubbles to the top. The liquid swirled, viscous and deadly. "What is that?" I asked, my eyes wide with feigned fear. "Just a vitamin cocktail," Miller said, his voice shaking slightly. "It will perk you up, get your blood flowing for the lawyer. It helps with memory." Terrence nodded from the doorway. "Take it, Dad. It is for your own good." I knew that liquid wasn't vitamins. It was likely a cocktail of adrenaline and digitalis, enough to simulate a heart attack in an old man. It was the backup plan. Since the dog ate the soup, they decided to inject the poison directly. Miller approached me, the needle raised. "Roll up your sleeve, Mr. King," he said. I slowly began to unbutton my cuff, drawing out the movement. Miller shifted his weight impatiently. Come on," he muttered. I pulled my sleeve up. Miller leaned in. He smelled of fear and antiseptic. He grabbed my arm to steady it. I let him find the vein. I let the tip of the needle hover millimeters from my skin. Then I moved, not with violence but with intimacy. I leaned forward until my face was inches from his ear. I gripped his wrist with my free hand. My grip was not the grip of a frail old man. It was the grip of a man who had moved crates for 40 years. Miller froze, his eyes widening. "Doc?" I whispered, my voice low and steady, completely devoid of the senile tremor I had been faking. "Before you push that plunger, you should know something. I sent a GPS pin to my fishing buddy about 20 minutes ago. He gets worried when I go to bad neighborhoods." Miller frowned, confused. "Your fishing buddy?" he asked. "Yes," I said, tightening my grip on his wrist until I felt his bones grind. "His name is Sheriff Patterson. He is on his way here right now to have a cup of coffee with us, and he is bringing the drug dogs." The color drained from Miller's face so fast I thought he might faint. The needle slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the metal tray. He stumbled away from me, crashing into a cabinet of glass jars. "Sheriff?" he squeaked. "You called the sheriff?" He turned to Terrence, his eyes bulging. "You said he was senile. You said he didn't know what day it was. He knows the sheriff, Terrence. You brought a man who is friends with the cops to my clinic. Are you trying to get me killed?" Terrence looked from me to Miller, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "He is lying," he shouted. "He doesn't know how to use a smartphone. I took it from him." I smiled. Cold, hard smile. "I have more than one phone, son." Miller grabbed Terrence by the lapels of his jacket and shoved him toward the door. "Get out!" he screamed. "Get him out of here right now. I am not going to jail for you. Take your dad and your debts and get out before the cops show up." He opened the back door of the clinic and practically threw us out into the garbage-strewn alley. The house for sale. Terrence grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep with bruising force. He dragged me toward the car, his breathing ragged and heavy. He threw me into the passenger seat and slammed the door so hard the car shook. He stomped around to the driver's side and got in, hitting the steering wheel with his fists, screaming a wordless sound of pure frustration. Then he turned to me. His face was twisted, his eyes burning with a hate that had no bottom. "Fine," he hissed, starting the engine and peeling out of the alley. "You want to play games, old man. You want to be difficult. We tried to do this the easy way. Tonight you sign those papers. I do not care if I have to break every finger on your hand to make you hold the pen. We are doing this the hard way." We drove back to my house in a silence that felt heavier than the humid air outside. As we turned the corner onto my street, my stomach dropped. There, in the middle of my front lawn, driven right into the heart of Esther's prize-winning hydrangea bushes, was a sign. It was bright red and aggressive. "For sale by owner. Cash only." Parked in the driveway was a sensible silver station wagon. Standing on the porch was a young white couple holding hands, looking hopeful. And standing in front of them, blocking the door, was a woman with a clipboard. It wasn't an agent. It was Tiffany. She was wearing a floral dress, pointing at the roof and smiling that shark smile. Terrence swerved onto the grass, leaving deep black tire tracks in the green lawn. The disrespect took my breath away. They weren't just killing me. They were erasing me. Tiffany was speaking loud and fast, her voice pitching up in that fake sweetness. "Oh yes," she was saying. "It has great bones, a real fixer-upper, but full of charm. We are letting it go for a steal because we need a quick closing." The young husband looked at the peeling paint on the porch railing. "Why is the price so low? It seems too good to be true." Tiffany let out a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Well, to be honest," she said, leaning in confidentially, "my father-in-law is moving to a specialized memory care facility next week. It is very sad, really. He has become quite unmanageable, dangerous, even. We need the cash to pay for his treatment. We already have a bed waiting for him. We just need a cash deposit today to hand over the keys on Monday." I stood by the car door, trembling with a rage so pure it felt like fire in my veins. She was selling my life, selling the walls that held my memories. The young woman looked sympathetic. "Oh, that is terrible," she said. "We can write a check for $5,000 today. Is that enough to hold it?" Tiffany's eyes lit up. "That would be perfect," she cooed. "Just make it out to cash. It speeds up the paperwork." I buttoned my cheap suit jacket. I adjusted my tie. I gripped my cane, not for support, but as a weapon of truth. I walked across the lawn, my boots crunching on the grass my son had just ruined. Terrence tried to grab my elbow, but I shook him off with surprising strength. I walked right up to the young couple. I didn't look like a senile old man. I looked like a man who had run a warehouse floor for 40 years. I looked them dead in the eye. "Do not write that check, son," I said, my voice booming across the yard. The husband froze, his pen hovering over the checkbook. "Why not?" he asked. "Because this house is not for sale," I said, my voice steady and hard. "And even if it was, you wouldn't want it. The foundation is eaten through with termites. The whole thing is held up by prayer and cheap paint, and you should know about the kitchen. My son just killed the family dog in there yesterday because it had rabies. The blood is still under the fridge." I pointed at Terrence with my cane. "He is not grieving. He is cleaning up a crime scene." The color drained from the young woman's face. She grabbed her husband's arm. "We are leaving," she whispered. The husband didn't argue. He shoved the checkbook into his pocket, and they ran for their station wagon. Tiffany screamed. It was a primal sound of pure fury. She flew off the porch. "You ruined it," she shrieked. "You ruin everything, you useless old leech." She lunged at me, scratching at my face, drawing blood on my cheek. Terrence stepped in and slapped her hard. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Shut up," he yelled. "Get inside before the neighbors call the cops." He grabbed the front of my shirt and pulled me close. "You pushed me too far, old man," he hissed. "The games are over tonight. You sign those papers or you are going to meet Mom a lot sooner than you planned." The final confrontation. The sun went down, but the heat stayed trapped inside the house like a fever. Terrence didn't bother locking me in the bedroom anymore. He sat in the middle of the living room in my favorite armchair. On his lap lay a 12-gauge shotgun. He was cleaning it, running an oily rag over the stock with slow, deliberate strokes. I sat on the edge of my bed. The door was open a crack, just enough to see the sliver of light from the hallway. I could hear Tiffany moving around in the dining room, the sharp sound of packing tape being ripped from the roll. She was liquidating. She was getting ready to run the moment the money hit the account. The phone rang. It was Terrence's cell. He let it ring, then picked it up, putting it on speaker. "Marco," he said, his voice cracking. "Please, I just need a few more hours." The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and terrifying. "Terrence, you are out of hours. My associates are on their way. They have instructions. If the money is not in the account by 9 a.m., they start with your knees. Then they move up. Do you understand?" The line went dead. Terrence stared at the phone. He took a long pull from the bourbon bottle. He stood up, the shotgun clutched in his hand. He swayed slightly. He looked down the hall right at my door. I reached under the mattress, my fingers brushing the cold steel of my own revolver. But I didn't pull it out. Not yet. I needed him close. I needed him to commit. The door to my room burst open, slamming against the wall. Terrence stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the hall light. In one hand he held the shotgun, the barrel pointed at my chest. In the other, he crumpled the power of attorney form. "Sign it," he rasped. "Sign it now, old man, or I swear to God I will paint this room with your brains." The barrel of the shotgun looked like a tunnel into the afterlife. I stared right down the center of it. Terrence was shaking, his whole body vibrating with a mixture of alcohol and adrenaline. "Sign it," he screamed again. "Sign the paper and I will let you live. I will put you in a home. You will be safe. Just sign the damn paper." I leaned back on the mattress. I did not reach for the pen. Instead, I asked the question that had been burning a hole in my soul. "Why did you kill your mother, Terrence? Why did you murder the woman who gave you life?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Terrence flinched. The shotgun dipped for a second, then snapped back up. "Shut up," he hissed. "You do not know what you are talking about." "I know about the pills," I said, my voice calm and low. "I know you switched them. I know you watched her die. Why, son? Was the money worth it?" Terrence let out a sound that was half laugh and half sob. He lowered the gun slightly, pacing the small room like a caged tiger. "You want to know why?" he shouted. "You really want to know?" He lowered the shotgun further, resting the butt against his thigh, but his finger remained tight on the trigger. His breathing was heavy, ragged. "Why?" he repeated, his voice rising to a frantic pitch. "Because she didn't trust me. She never trusted me. She made me beg for every damn cent. I'm her son. I was supposed to have a future. That old hag was sitting on $3 million, clipping coupons, wearing clothes from the Goodwill, and sending me $20 at a time like I was a kid. She had enough money to save me, to get me out of debt. But she just said, 'No, Terrence. Learn a lesson.'" He took a step closer, raising the gun again, the barrel trembling. "I found the pills, Dad. I found the real pills. She kept them locked in the pantry, hidden inside a damn spice jar. She was hiding her medicine because she was scared I'd steal it. She was waiting for me to hit bottom. She was waiting for me to fail. I went into the kitchen that night to prove I was smart, to prove I was better than her. I made the switch so smooth. She never even looked at the bottle when she took them. I watched her swallow them, Dad. I watched her die slow, clutching her chest. And you know what? Felt like justice. His face was a mask of pure, ugly resentment. She was going to lock that money away for 10 years. 10 years. I'd be dead in 3 days if Marco got his hands on me. She chose a trust fund over her own son. She chose silence and secrets over me. I deserved that money. I earned it by suffering through her judgmental pity for 30 years. You don't understand, old man. You never understood. He lifted the shotgun level with my head. Now I'm taking what's mine. You sign this power of attorney right now, and maybe Marco will let you live long enough for me to find a cheap old folks home for you. You tried to be a hero, but you just made everything worse. Sign it. I took a deep breath, letting the shame and the hatred settle into a cold, lethal resolve. The recording device beneath the floorboard had caught everything. The confession was complete. I pushed myself up onto my elbow, looking him square in the eye. I didn't reach for the pen. I reached for the truth. The trust fund is empty, Terrence, I said, my voice cutting through his rage like razor wire. She closed the accounts 3 weeks ago. Terrence froze. His eyes, already bloodshot, widened into saucers. What? You're lying. Gold said. Gold is my lawyer, I interrupted. He works for me. Esther moved every cent out of that account the day she hired the private investigator. She knew you were stealing. She knew you were desperate. She knew you would kill her. I paused, letting the shock paralyze him. You killed her for a debt you already lost, I said, the final word echoing in the room. The shock on his face turned to instant, violent madness. He didn't scream this time. He just made a guttural noise and cocked the shotgun. The metallic shhh clack of the action was the last sound I needed to hear. As he raised the gun to his shoulder, I moved. I rolled off the bed, kicking the nightstand toward him as a distraction, simultaneously ripping the loose floorboard out from under the mattress with my free hand. I lunged to the floor, my hand closing around the familiar, cold weight of the .38 snub-nose revolver. Terrence fired. The blast was deafening. The roar filled the room, and the plaster above the headboard exploded in a cloud of white dust and debris, raining down on the bed where I had been a second before. But I was already on the ground, rolling, the small revolver already up and sighted. Drop it, Terrence, I roared. It's over. He spun, his eyes wild, sighting the shotgun on me again. But I was faster. I had spent 40 years waiting for this moment. I fired once. The blast was sharp and quick, nothing like the shotgun's roar. The bullet didn't hit him. It struck the shotgun's wood stock, splintering the frame near the trigger housing and knocking the weapon violently from his hands. Clattered against the wall, harmless. Terrence stared at his empty hands, then down at the ruined shotgun, the reality of his failure finally crashing down on him. He crumpled to his knees, his shoulders shaking. No, 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 he whimpered, staring at the floor. The sound of the front door being kicked in rattled the house. Heavy footsteps stormed down the hallway. Vance, the PI, burst into the room, followed by 2 uniformed police officers, their weapons drawn. Police, drop your weapon, the first officer shouted, his voice hard and commanding. I slowly lowered the revolver and placed it on the floor, kicking it away with my foot. Terrence didn't look up. He was staring at the gun he had dropped, staring at his ruined inheritance. Vance walked over to me, looking down at the scattered plaster and the bullet hole in the ceiling. He looked at the floorboard I had torn up, then back at me. Booker, he said, nodding slowly. You passed the test. The police officers were cuffing Terrence, pulling him roughly to his feet. As they led him out of the room, he passed me. He didn't fight. He just looked at me with a lost, hollow expression. You chose the old man, he whispered, the words choked with disbelief. She chose you. I watched him go. I sat there on the floor, staring at the broken room, the dust, and the silence. Esther hadn't chosen me. She had simply prepared. I reached down and picked up the voice recorder from under the floorboard. The red light was still blinking, showing that the confession, the full, ugly truth, was safe. Justice was done. He admitted to threatening me with the shotgun, calling it a breakdown, a moment of grief-induced insanity. But when the detective asked about Esther, he shut down. He shook his head violently, denying everything. "My mother died of a heart attack," he insisted, his voice rising in pitch. "She was old. Her heart was weak. I loved her. I would never hurt her. You have nothing on me for that." Nothing. I watched him lie, watched the man I had protected twist the truth until it snapped. He thought he was smart. He thought that without a body or a weapon, he could talk his way out of a murder charge. He didn't know about the floorboard or the technology that had been recording his every breath. The door to the interrogation room opened, and Solomon Gold walked in. He didn't look like a lawyer. He looked like an executioner in a three-piece suit. In his hand, he carried a single object, my old Nokia brick phone. Terrence looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" "I want my lawyer." Gold didn't answer. He walked to the table and placed the phone in the center of the metal surface. Gold pressed a button. The screen glowed a dull green. For the first time, I saw genuine fear flicker in my son's eyes. Gold pressed play. The audio was tiny but crystal clear. My voice came through first. "Why did you kill your mother, Terrence?" Then came Terrence's voice, the voice of the monster. "Because she was a miser. She was sitting on millions, Dad." She forced my hand. I switched the beta blockers for the stimulants. It wasn't poison. It was just medicine. If she had been stronger, she would have survived. Terrence stopped breathing. He stared at the phone as his justification, his blame, and his full confession played out. He slumped back in his chair, gray and ashen. He looked at the two-way mirror, knowing I was there. He knew the senile old man he had tried to rob had been 2 steps ahead the entire time. Gold stopped the recording, picked up the phone, and walked out. My son put his head on the table and began to sob, the weeping of a man who realized his life was over. Tiffany's betrayal. Detective Johnson stepped into the observation booth. He looked tired but satisfied. "We have him, Mr. King," he said quietly. "That recording is admissible. Proves premeditation and motive. But that's not all." He opened a file. "We have been questioning your daughter-in-law in the next room." She cracked. Johnson laid a transcript in front of me. "She is singing like a canary to save her own skin. She confessed to everything. Opening the credit cards in your name, the identity theft, poisoning the dog to test the powder. And most importantly, she gave a sworn statement that she witnessed Terrence throwing away the real heart medication and replacing it with the stimulants. She said he bragged about it." I looked down at the black and white text. Tiffany was throwing him to the wolves. There was no loyalty among thieves. The finality of it settled in my chest. My family was gone. Detective Johnson cleared his throat. "There is one more thing, Mr. King," he said, his voice grave. "To secure a conviction for first-degree murder, we need physical evidence. We need to exhume Esther's body. We need to run a toxicology screen. I know this is asking a lot, but we need your permission." I looked through the glass at my son. Esther was in the cold ground because of him. If bringing her up meant keeping him down, then it was what I had to do. "Do it," I said, my voice hard as stone. "Dig her up, find the poison, and bury him with it. The price of justice." The morning they dug up my wife, the sky was the color of a bruise. I stood at the edge of the cemetery plot, leaning heavy on my cane while the machinery roared. Every scoop of dirt felt like a physical blow. Alastair Thorne sat in his wheelchair beside me, bearing witness. We followed the white van to the medical examiner's office. Hours later, Detective Johnson pushed open the double doors. He sat down opposite us and placed a clear plastic evidence bag on the table. Inside was a toxicology graph. "We have the results," Johnson said, his voice low and professional. The medical examiner found massive concentrations of ephedrine and caffeine in her blood work, along with traces of a synthetic amphetamine. "It was not a natural heart attack, Mr. King." Her heart didn't fail. It was exploded. The dosage was 10 times the safe limit. I looked at the graph, seeing the moment my wife died. We ran a comparison against the residue found in the vial your investigator pulled from the trash, Johnson continued. It is a perfect chemical match. We also found traces of the same substance in the upholstery of your son's car. It is conclusive. We have the weapon, the opportunity, the motive, and the confession. The numbness was replaced by the cold, hard weight of finality. My son murdered my wife. I wiped a tear away angrily. Thorne nodded slowly. We got him, Booker, he whispered. We got the bastard. By 5 o'clock, Terrence King was charged with murder in the first degree, conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, grand larceny, and fraud. Tiffany was charged as an accessory. Bail was denied. Esther's real will. I sat in the waiting room, feeling empty. Solomon Gold walked in, carrying a thick manila envelope. The legal matter is in the hands of the state, he said. But there is still the matter of the estate. I don't care about the money, Solomon. Burn it. Gold shook his head. You need to see this. He opened the envelope and pulled out a document. The will we showed Terrence was a decoy designed to flush him out. Esther wrote another one. A final one. He placed a handwritten letter in my hands. It was on the creamy stationery she used for special occasions. I traced her penmanship. My dearest Booker, I read. If you are reading this, it means I am gone. And it likely means I did not go peacefully. I wanted you to live a simple life. But the vulture was already in our nest. I have watched our son Terrence change. I fear the rot has reached the core. If I die under suspicious circumstances, do not trust him. Go to Alistair Thorne. He holds the key to everything. I love you, Booker. You were my soldier in life, and I know you will be my soldier after I am gone. Fight for us. Fight for the truth. Gold turned to the formal legal document. This is the last will and testament of Esther King. It supersedes all previous documents. Article 1 regarding the disposition of assets to immediate family. To my son, Terrence King, I leave the sum of $1 US. I stared at the document. It was a deliberate, calculated insult. Leaving him $1 meant she remembered him, considered him, and decided that was exactly what he was worth. Article 3 regarding the residuary estate. To my husband, Booker King, I leave the entirety of my estate, totaling $3,200,000. The money felt like the price of my wife's life. I walked to the window of the police station. The house on Elm Street was a mausoleum of bad memories. Sell it, I said without turning around. Sell the house. I never want to step foot inside that place again. And the money? Gold asked. I don't want it, I said firmly. I have my pension, but I am not going to burn it. Esther worked too hard for it. I want to start a foundation, Solomon. The Esther King Foundation. I want to hire lawyers for elderly people who are being abused by their families. I want to hire private investigators to expose the greedy children waiting for their inheritance. I want every dime of that $3 million to be used to stop people like Terrence. Gold smiled. That is a noble legacy, Mr. King. Esther would be proud. Free at last. I drove to the state correctional facility. I sat in the visitation booth on the secure side of the glass. Terrence was led in. He had lost 20 pounds. His head was shaved. He looked broken. Dad, he whispered, his hand shaking on the receiver. Dad, you came. I picked up the phone. I came to give you something. I held up the blue folder and pressed the page against the glass. Read it. Terrence, Article 1. He squinted, reading the line. To my son, Terrence King, I leave the sum of $1. He started to cry, great heaving sobs. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single crisp dollar bill. I slid it through the slot in the metal tray. Here is your inheritance, son. Don't spend it all in one place. I hung up the phone. I turned my back on his weeping face and walked out of the prison. I was alone, but I was free. I walked to the railing of a private riverboat. It was 1 year later. I was in Paris. I wore a bespoke navy suit. Alistair Thorne sat nearby. I pulled out a small velvet pouch containing a handful of Esther's ashes. I walked to the railing, opened the pouch and tilted it over the water. The gray dust caught the wind, swirling for a moment in the golden light before settling onto the surface of the San River. "Go see the world, my love," I whispered. "You earned it." I turned back to Thorn. We clinked glasses of Bordeaux. "To Esther," Thorn said. "And to justice," I replied. I looked up at the sky. I thought of Terence in his cell. I thought of the past, but then I let it go. I smiled. It was the smile of a man who had walked through fire and come out the other side with his soul intact. "We are free, Esther," I whispered to the wind. "We are finally free."